Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Milinda Rajapaksha. I'm the co-convener of NextGen SL. And my other co-convener is Rasika Jayakodi. And as most of you know very well, NextGen SL is a cross-party youth initiative. We found this organization almost 8 years ago to debate on different topics which we don't agree on. So those days we had a lot of topics which we don't basically agree on. And we had, very initially we had at that time SLFP, UNP, JVP, all three parties have different names now. Then later joined CWC, TNA, Muslim Congress. So more or less we have almost all the parties which represent the parliament at the moment. So we have been debating on different topics which we don't agree on. But then very later we realized there are topics which we all agree on. There are certain areas which we can work together. So then we agreed upon working on certain topics and certain agendas. One such thing is, I would say, the electoral reforms, then campaign financing law. So those are the different topics which we all thought we should work on. Then as most of you have supported us on advancing the LGBTQ agenda, which we are really pushing for as a cross-party youth initiative. Regardless whether our parties agree on it or not, we as youth groups pushing for the agenda. And today, we are here. Most of you have attended our events before. But today we, as you all know, NextGen SL is very key on economics-related matters. Even though we are not economic experts, we have understood our entire political landscape is largely depends on economics reforms. So we have been very keen on that for last almost 3 years. The post-budget forum with cross-party members of parliaments was hosted by NextGen SL. So that was a very big victory NextGen SL had. We could bring 3-4 parties together to discuss about the budget after each budget. Apart from that, we discuss about debt restructuring at the very initial stage. I remember even Kasturi was one panelist of that. We brought even the private sector together. That happened even before everyone started talking about debt restructuring. And today also we are pushing for a new agenda, that is this tax reforms. So we all know almost everyone in this room is paying tax, including members of parliament. And everyone has their own concerns about paying taxes today. But for some good reason, we all have understood we have to pay taxes, and we are willing to pay certain portion of taxes. And corporate sector is paying almost, what, Kasturi, 36%? Indika, 36% of, huh? Okay, so paying around more than 30% of corporate taxes. So that is the situation in Sri Lanka. I'm not an expert on that, but that has really, really affected the political landscape of the country. So we have invited today, we have brought a fantastic panel together, the current State Minister of Finance, Honorable Sinhala Singh, former State Minister of Finance, Honorable Eran Wickramaratne, and we also invited Dr. Nalaka Godaheva, who is from the Freedom People's Congress. Dr. Nalaka Godaheva is badly ill. He's having virus flu today, so he will not be joining. But Professor Anil Jayanta, who is from NPP slash JVP, I would say. Professor is the head of the Economic Council of NPP. He will be here in 5 minutes. He's on the way from the University of Jayawardhanapura, but he's on the way. We called him. He will be here in 5-10 minutes. Then to add a different perspective into this whole conversation, we invited Mr. Dumindu Hulangamu, who is the chairman of Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. So that will bring he's a chartered accountant, plus the chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. So we hope Dumindu can start this conversation. So we invited him to have the first remarks to set up the stage, set up the conversation. Then we will probably invite Honorable MP Eran Wickramaratne, then Honorable Sinhalaamsinhala. Then we invited your favorite young economist, Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocata. Dana is not an economist, as Dana says, but Dana talk about economics in a very simple manner. So Dhananath will moderate the session. So the first, Mr. Dumindu Hulangamu will talk for 15-20 minutes. Then our MPs will talk each 10 to 15 minutes maximum. Then we will go for the panel discussion, where we will have time for you all to ask questions, get engaged with MPs. So that is the plan for the day. So I welcome Honorable MPs and Honorable MP Mayantha Disanayake, who has been a big supporter of our Next Gen SL work, and now we are collaborating with him on Open Caucus of the Parliament, another new initiative. So I invite you all from the Parliament, from the private sector, from the government sector, from the bilateral agencies, multilateral agencies, youth activists, young people from different political parties. I can see people from UNP, I saw from SJB, from SLPP, I saw the team. I saw young people from JVP. It's a fantastic room. Everyone is here. So welcome you all on behalf of Next Gen SL. And we will start with Mr. Dumindu Hulangamu, Chairman of Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Thank you.
Honorable Sinhalaamsinhala, State Minister of Finance, Honorable Eran Wickramaratne, Honorable Mayantha Disanayake, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank the Next Gen Sri Lanka movement for inviting me today to talk about the subject, unlocking the power of taxes. I would have rephrased this to say unlocking the potential of taxes. But you all used the word unlocking the power of taxes. I think is opportune in terms of the current situation and the rates of taxes you're paying. Taxation has become a very powerful subject. I have been in tax practice myself, representing my firm for the last 30 years. And we have never experienced the tax regime that is in force today. So if I may start off, when you say taxation, there are 4 principles of taxation. In any country, when the tax laws are drafted, the policies formulated, there are certain principles on which taxation is formed. A, the taxation system must be fair and equitable, in that it has to be charged on people's affordability to pay. 2, a tax system must be consistent, in that it does not change every year, so that businesses can plan their business and taxation is consistent, and you create an environment in which businesses can operate without having to worry what's going to happen the next year. The third is that the taxation system must be easy to operate. The administration, both for the administrator of the taxes and the taxpayer, the tax system must be easy to understand and operate, less costly to maintain. So those are the principles upon which generally a tax system is built. But in Sri Lanka, it is very difficult, and I don't think it's ever been built on these principles, because it has its own unique problems. I think I don't have to go back to what has happened in the past in terms of our taxation policy, increases, reductions, changes that have taken place. All know what happened in the past and what we are in the current situation. So on the policy side, if you take today, we have two primary sources of income, that is income tax and the indirect taxes, or direct tax and indirect taxes. So the indirect taxes are essentially the VAT, which is at 15%. We have a social security contribution tax at 2.5%, both on turnover. Then we have the stamp duty that is paid to the provincial councils on the purchase of land. Then you have the border taxes that are taxed at the point of import, which essentially will be VAT, SSL, and then the customs duty, excise duties, and we have this strange thing called cess, which is not available in, in dictionary, but we have cesses. Then we have the local taxes on indirect, so VAT, the social security contribution levy, and excise taxes on tobacco and alcohol, and the betting and gaming taxes. So currently, you know the income tax rates that you're paying. An individual pays a rate of 36%, exceeding 3.5 million of income, and a corporate pays a flat rate of 30%. We had concessionary rates up to last year for different sectors, which are called priority sectors. We had exports, we had healthcare, we had education at lesser rates, but everything has been made to 30%. So that's the tax structure we have to collect taxes of the government. So is there anything wrong in this tax structure? No, I don't think. If that is what you are looking at, in my view, the current tax rates that have been charged is not minimal, it's excessive. 36% income tax rate of any income over 3.5 million rupees is a fairly substantial tax rate. Now, why this is excessive or seen to be excessive is because we lived in a low tax regime. Up to last year, our personal income tax rate had a highest rate of 18%. We were on par with Singapore, Hong Kong, and all those countries. Now, when we are comparing 36% and saying our taxes are very high, we have to compare against what it was. That is the reason why we are saying it's too high. So what is the reason that we have these varying tax rates? One regime makes it 18%, next regime makes it 36%, and we keep changing these tax rates every year. The reason is that successive governments, we have members of parliament representing all political parties, successive governments have adopted what is called deficit financing. We plan of expenditure, and based on the expenditure, we decide the revenue. So when we have a deficit, what we do, we tweak the tax system around to see how much we can collect from taxes, and the balance we finance through borrowings. That is what we call deficit financing, what has happened over the years. So in my view, if you take the total Sri Lankan income, expenditure rather, of approximately this year's expenditure is budgeted at about 1.3 trillion for salaries of public servants. Another 1.3 trillion is for welfare, which includes Samruddhi, health, education, goods and services, what you purchase those areas, about another 1.3 million. So both together is about 2.6 trillion. Or maybe slightly, the Honorable Minister is here, he might correct the exact figures. I think the estimate for this year is about 2.7, 2.8 trillion. So up to that point, we are okay. Because our income expected this year from all these sources of taxation is around 3.2 trillion. But whether we get there is a question, but I think we might end up maybe 80%, hopefully 75 to 80% close to that figure. At 2.8 trillion, we are lucky if we get that figure. So I think after a long time, the first 6 months, the Honorable Minister, we are having a surplus in the primary account, slight surplus. So up to that point, our income and expenditure are balancing. But where have we gone wrong is on the interest cost. Our interest cost is about another 2.3 trillion for this year. That's the figure, right? About 2.3 trillion. So the moment you bring the interest costs in, you have a huge budget deficit. So our income cannot support the budget, the interest costs. And that is before taking into account in capital expenditure. The capital expenditure is about another 2.5 trillion on top of this, right? So our income, or rather put it this way, about 70% of our income goes by interest alone at the current rates. Hopefully interest will come down now with the short-term treasury bills rates going down. I don't know what will happen on the debt restructuring on the domestic and the foreign side, where the interest will come down below this figure. But our interest cost alone is about 70% of our income. So I don't think there's anything wrong on the revenue side. The revenue side is at the maximum. The revenue, in my view, to increase beyond this, the economy must grow. The economy must grow at a faster pace, 6, 7, 8%. If we are to support and sustain this level of expenditure in the public sector and the interest costs. So that, in my view, the taxation is at the highest levels. We can't increase VAT beyond 15%. We can't increase income tax beyond 36%. We cannot increase the corporate rate beyond 30%, dividend rate beyond 15%. I think we are at the maximum in terms of the tax rates that we are charging in all these sectors. The more you increase the rate of tax, the law of diminishing returns will come in and the collections will drop. There's more evasion, there's less money for development, or rather redeployment of reserves and money into business. So there'll be less expansion, there's less capital accumulation. So economy will work on the reverse if the taxation rates are increased beyond this figure, in my view. So there is nothing wrong in the rate. My view is that the issue is the expenditure. Now, in the past, governments have breached the deficit with borrowings. I mean, all governments. In hindsight, easy to say, but at that time, that's how we did. The budget deficit was breached through loans, both domestic and foreign borrowings. And that deficit, we are unable to pay now at the current rates of interest. So if we are to, all governments do finance their budget deficits by borrowings. I don't think any government does not have a clear surplus. Most governments do have deficits, including the US. But the rate at which they borrow to pay those debts are at very minimal, 1%, 2%. And that was Sri Lanka was many years ago. That is why we were able to support our budget deficit, because the economy also grew at a faster rate. If the economy grows at a faster rate, say 6, 7, 8%, 6%, then you can pay off your interest. It's like a normal company. You borrow when you do your business. But if your profits go faster than the interest you pay, you can sustain that. But what happened to us was that we were not able to grow at a rate faster than the rate of interest we are paying. Because the loans of $82 billion we have taken, whether they have gone to productive investments is the question. Because if you take loans and invest and they go into productive ventures, a productive investment, then the return on that investment will bring the economic growth. The expressways, the highways, the dams, the waterways, all what we have constructed is bringing us adequate return, then we can increase our tax revenues through which we can pay our government expenditure. So the problem lies, to me, is the government expenditure. But government expenditure also, you can't cut it down overnight. A lot of people are saying waste, but we can't cut it overnight. 1.3 trillion is public sector salaries. You can't put them on the road tomorrow. People are saying to cut defense expenditure. You cannot put the soldiers on the road next day, right? So what you can do is, of course, you cannot recruit, but you have to keep the public service cost, in my view, will continue this way for some time. We cannot bring it down overnight. There's a social unrest if that happens. Therefore, what do we do? The only relief I see is that we can get on the interest expenditure we are paying. Only if the interest relief is given by the creditors, can we breach the budget deficit. Otherwise, we are going to have this problem for a longer time. That is on the policy side. Then on the administration side, what do we do in order to collect revenue? The administration is largely the revenue collecting authorities. If I give you a figure, if you take the Department of Inland Revenue, the minister is here, how good the administration or how big the administration can come to conclusion. Of our total income tax collections and VAT collection, 96% comes on return taxes. That is self-assessment, self-declared tax is the total, 96% total collection. Only 4% comes from investigations, assessments, and other areas. 96% is on return, which means the penetration level is not adequate by the revenue authorities to enhance the tax base. But how much is there, I don't know. People are saying we need to increase the tax base, we need to enhance, we need to go raid, find people who are not paying taxes. But how much of it is there, I really don't know. I don't think we can make 3.2 trillion or 6 trillion, in my view. The non-tax paying people will not be 100%, is my view. So it might be 25% more. So even if you get their revenue, you're not going to breach the budget deficit because the expenditure side is still too long, too big with the government interest expense incurring. But we can really still improve it. But our revenue collecting authorities need modernization. If I talk for the Department of Inland Revenue, the staff, the skill set needs to be modernized. It's not a modernized or modern revenue collecting authority. It has archaic practices, archaic methods, manual-driven systems. You cannot collect taxes today because the transactions are so complicated. Economy is so complicated. You cannot apply the traditional revenue collecting mechanisms to collect tax revenues. You need to be digitalized. For example, I can tell you now, what are the two biggest purchases in Sri Lanka for a person? It's a house, land, or a motor car. Others are, by the way, those are the three biggest assets that a person would purchase. So if a person has undeclared money and he purchases a house or a motor vehicle out of the undeclared money, the revenue, Inland Revenue gets a copy of every single land that you purchase. Just want to keep you informed. A copy of the deed or the information of the deed is sent for the Provincial Council to the Inland Revenue. The RMB says a list of all the motor vehicles registered exceeding a certain engine capacity. But it's manually, humanly impossible to manually check it. So 1 in 1,000 will get a letter from the department saying, please explain how you bought this asset. And that 1 in 1,000, 100 people come and say, 50 people will say, okay, make a shape kala denda, we'll do something, and 50 will pay. That is how it works. So unless you have a digitalized platform where all these purchases are getting recorded in one place, one point, you cannot track it. So our push, I think the government is also looking at it very strongly, is to push for the digitalization of the revenue collecting authorities, link it with the RMB, the land registry. Then you'll be able to see all the transactions that are taking place by people who have undeclared funds. So we need for that a modern revenue authority or people who have modern thinking, who can change the landscape of revenue collection. The current landscape of revenue collection is very archaic, very primitive, it's manually driven, personal contact, it won't work. So, to set the stage, Melinda, I have discussed about the policy. I can't see anything wrong with the tax policy. Tax policy is correct, rates are right, all that is fine. The issue is with government expenditure. But that is something you can't bring out overnight. It's something that has built up over a period of time by successive governments, not one government, all governments. Free fertilizer, Samurdhi, all that has brought into it. So, since this is the forum represented by all political parties, as you said, my fervent request is to all political parties is the next year is election year. Is don't auction assets that you don't exist, assets that you don't earn. Please don't come and promise that I'll give fertilizer free, I'll give Samurdhi to another, I'll increase Samurdhi allowance from 10,000 to 50,000 rupees, I'll give fuel at 200 rupees, I'll give electricity at X number of units. If you do that, we go back to where we were. we cannot afford to go through the financial crisis. We are gradually stabilizing the situation, coming through that. It's a very costly exercise. This exercise that we are going through is a very costly exercise, you and me both. 18% tax to 36% tax. Fuel from 140 or 150 rupees a litre to 340 rupees a litre. Electricity has gone up by almost 200-300% because we never increased tariffs from 2009 to now. In fact, 2014 or 15, the then government brought the tariff down by 25%. Right? So, if you go that path, this country will come out of the situation. I know it's difficult. People are going through hardships. Costs have gone up. Taxes have gone up. But if we don't resolve this problem now, in the next year or two, I don't think we will come out of this. The state-owned enterprise restructuring, because this is only one aspect, but there's a broader policy framework behind it. Taxation is one aspect. Why is taxes going high? Because the entire reform has to be carried out. The entire reform process has to incorporate all sectors of society, all sectors of revenue, all sectors in government. So the reform is expensive, it's difficult. Greece went through it over 12, 13 years. I mean, I don't want to go back to why we went through it and find fault, and the blame game is not my area. But I'm saying, at least in the future, we make sure that we don't go and promise things that we can't deliver. Election time coming, because next year elections are coming. So I think if you don't follow this path, I can't see other path. The reform has to be carried out. We must be market-driven economy. We must look at the vulnerable sector of our country to targeted reliefs and targeted subsidies, but not general subsidies where you and I both benefit. Petrol at 200 rupees, electricity at $1 or whatever, are all non-targeted benefits. So if you go that path, there's no way that we can come out of the problem. So my fervent request, as a launch chamber, we engage with all political parties. We talk to all political parties. So my request has been, therefore, to all parties that are here, is to make sure that we don't promise things we can't deliver. And in fact, as a launch chamber, we have taken a commitment this time that if people come and promise things they can't deliver, we will come out on stage, on media, and tell this is right, this is wrong. Because we have to educate the public if the political party are not doing it, right? So that is my message to all of you, is that the topic goes beyond this. It's a matter that all of us as Sri Lankans have to resolve it. No outsider can resolve the problem for us. We had to resolve it ourselves. Whether IMF came or not, in my view, we had to do this reform. And at least we see some light at the end of the tunnel, but a long way to go still. If there is no political support, the people don't support it, it will collapse. So the support of the people and political parties are required to carry this through. That's a message. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dumindulangamu. Now we have a very strong foundation for the conversation today, and I welcome Professor Anil Jayantha. We started even when you were on the way. So I will invite former Finance Minister, former State Finance Minister, Honorable Eran Wickramaratne to deliver the next speech.
Thank you. I want to thank Rasika and Melinda and NextGen for inviting me to be here, and Minister Sinhalaamsinhala and my colleague Mantha and everyone else. Thank you for being here today. I would just like to make a few comments as on the framework. I listened carefully to Duminda, and he was very focused on the taxes and the numbers. And I thought I'm going to say a few things, then we can probably take it up in the discussion. Clearly, as he said, tax regime needs to be predictable. That's the most important thing, even more than the rate, because at least then businesses could actually plan, and there's some predictability. You know what you can do and you can't do. You know whether you're competitive or not competitive, so you don't waste time, resources, and energy. So we can't be having these super gains taxes like we did in 2015 and in 2021, surcharges and things like that. These must be things of the past. We can't have Parliament coming and passing laws. Shehan and I was just talking about it a little while ago. Suddenly, we privatize things and then try to take it back. And, when you do this kind of things for a decade or two, business and investors don't forget it. And it was very difficult to drill into the members of Parliament even at that time, because that sensitivity was not really there and it was not really understood. So we have some challenges there. The IMF program clearly talks about the primary balance, right, that it needs to be positive. It's good to hear that it's positive in the quarter, and I hope by the year we will be running positive, because we have had only a positive primary balance only 5 times in 75 years. That was 2017, 2018, and if we get it in 2023, I think that will be good. At least we're going in the right direction. The revenue has to go up. So 14% of GDP by 2026. We were in 2017-18, we got close to 12 plus, nearly 13% of GDP. Then it caved in. We are at, 8 or 9 now, and we need to basically get it back up there. So that's clear. I like the principles that were put here: simplicity, transparency, neutrality, and stability. I would have put the word equity, certainly, because you're not going to get stability without equity. So in my language, always equity will be there, you say. And this is where sometimes the perspectives can differ, because otherwise I don't think you're ever going to really achieve. So fiscal consolidation is the trick. And in the IMF program, when we were in office, it was revenue-based fiscal consolidation. I was a little surprised that in the next IMF program, that it was also only revenue-based fiscal consolidation. Devinder made that point, and I want to elaborate on that. And that's a point about looking at cost. So interest expenses are there, and rupee interest expenses will come down. We need to really negotiate hard on the foreign currency debt restructuring and actually get that to manageable levels with people who have benefited and now have to pay for it. So now on the expenditure side, I'm not very concerned about samurdhi and fertilizer. Fertilizer, because there's productivity. Samurdhi, what our real concern is targeting. And Aswasuma, replacing samurdhi, is in the right direction, even though we have some major concerns, and we are discussing that even as an opposition with the government. But the real problems are, in my view, it's to do with subjects that even Devinder doesn't mention. Politicians not mentioning, I can understand. It's to do with the public service and with defense expenditure. And nobody talks about that. Sri Lanka's expenditures are unbelievable. Expenditure on defense is more than 10%. The highest in all of Asia. The highest in all of Asia. 14 years after a conflict. And then public services. One Sri Lankan public servant to 17 Sri Lankan citizens. India, Bangladesh, Pakistan is between 100 and 180. Japan is 1:300. And we need to face up to this. The promises are not about fertilizer. The promises were about jobs, that politicians ruined the country. That was really the issue. And those are not sustainable. And by any measure, if I were to do a survey among you about the services you get from government, I don't need to really do the research. I can tell you, whether you go to the municipality, whether you go to the inland revenue, customs, excise, or whether you go to the electricity board or some other utility, I don't need to comment on the services that you get. So we need to face up to it. Next gen, I believe in next gen, not in this gen. You can change it. I think the next debate should be on actually looking at cost as Dominda suggested and looking at it radically. I think this debate needs to open in the country, that people really come to terms with this, because this is something that is not being talked on. I understand about social stability. I'm all for it. As Dominda correctly said, you can't do these things overnight. But we have to start. We have to start. We need a 5-year program. And if we have a 5-year program, we'll actually begin to eventually see the results of it. People will begin to believe that we are very serious about it. So that's something that we really need to take it. When we talk about cutting, expenditures in public service, in defense and all, really why we need to put it in human resources. Move from hard infrastructure to soft infrastructure. We need education and health is unbelievably low, 1%, 1.5% of GDP. There were times in this country, it was 4% of GDP. And really, being a small island nation, if you look at our comparative advantage, it's our location, and it has to be our human resources, because we are just the size of 1 or 2 cities in India and China. So we should be really investing in our human resources. I don't worry about brain drain. I'm just saying invest. It will take care of itself. Expand access and opportunity for people. Don't be restrictive. Just be more open. Invest in it. Open the borders. You see, and I think that's the way Sri Lanka should actually go. And we need to be radical about it. So when we take money off the areas where we think we are spending too much, we are not cutting it. We are redirecting it into human resources, which is education and health. I have, because of the time factor, I have broadly 3 suggestions I'm just going to put on the table as we look at how the country should move forward. We're looking at taxes, and I am in basic agreement that we are at the high level, and there's not anywhere else that we could actually go. If you look at tax collection, and he referred to it, there was more than 1.6 or 7 million taxpayers, because we brought in all the others in the 2016, 17, 18 period. And it went up, when we took office, it was like 620,000 taxpayers, 1.7 billion. And I mustn't forget Mangala Samaravira. We went after it, and we were able to increase it by about 1 million. Suddenly it had dropped, and of course post-COVID, there is a problem, practical problem. Everybody understands that there's a practical issue. And so that number has actually dropped to about 500,000 or 600,000 presently. In other words, everybody needs to pay their fair share. You see, the tax rates is a different issue, but everybody needs to be actually contributing their fair share. So my suggestion, one of the suggestions I have is, right, we have a lot of public assets in this country, unbelievable. Our lands, buildings, public assets. If you were a private sector, there are lots of private sector heads sitting here. You don't leave your assets, just to dry and no return on the assets. Why not in government? Why should it be like that? We should really look at those assets. So we have the real assets that are there, and we have the operational assets as well. And our operational assets are like public transport, operational assets, right, that the country has, whether it's a Lea line. Remember this, some can make money, some have to be shut down, and we need to really save. We need to have the courage to say so, because otherwise we can't put this right. But where we can generate, right, if you manage the public assets publicly, right, we can actually generate. So it's in the area of transport, ports, airports, right? These are assets that can generate revenues. Utilities, all the utilities. I know people are suffering. I know it's difficult because some of these reforms have come suddenly, and I'm very sympathetic to the poor, and that's why I bring the equity argument in, that we need to look at how we really balance it with the poor and the low-income earning. But utilities is another area, public asset management, and then all the financial services. And here, I think some work needs to be done. If you really do some work here, and we take what has happened in other countries, from the Kazanas to the Temaseks and all, Malaysia, Singapore, and all that, right? I think it's nothing new. It's a question of actually getting down to it and actually doing it. We had an initiative, Duminda, Suresh, we all sat several years ago. it came to a point and it stopped. No political will. That's why it stopped. And I'm hoping that this government has initiated it, that they will please proceed with it. Please proceed with it. We need to get it done. We need to manage it. And it's unbelievable what revenue you will be able to get. Just a first glance shows me you can get huge revenues if you actually go about it in the correct way. Because Sri Lanka has so many assets and no revenues are coming. My second suggestion is, right, on tax policy, we don't always have to agree. It's like monetary policy. If you have a monetary policy committee, why not the tax policy committee? Why restrict it just to the finance minister and the finance ministry in any country for a given period? We need continuity in this. So why not a tax policy committee, like the monetary policy committee, where there's continuity, where the intellectuals can come and debate and argue with politicians like myself and then decide whether something is feasible or not. And some of them have to have a long-term trajectory. So that is why I'm putting a second suggestion on the table saying, let's have a tax policy committee. And my third suggestion is, right, let's have a single revenue collection authority. I know I'm not going to get re-elected. I was State Minister of Finance. 75% of all the country's revenue, and now Shehani's, comes from inland revenue, customs, and excise. Nobody accused Mangala or me of stealing $1. But nobody said even during your period, corruption came down. So you understand the problem. We want expenditure down. We want revenues up. We want the leakage to be stopped as well, if you are really going to tackle this problem. And therefore, my suggestion on the table is a single tax collection authority. Some countries have successfully done it, and it can be done. This is next gen. Some of these things might not happen in my lifetime. But next gen, you need to think about it. Some of these things need to be seriously looked at. Our generation will say, couldn't do it for 30 years, we can't do it, it's going to be short. We have to be radical if you're going to put this country right. Otherwise, it can't happen. So I'm putting it on the table and saying, be radical. You go to customs, you clear the goods, customs only looks at the HS code or whatever, and they say what the HS code is there's no discussion, there's no interaction, we can do it online, whatever. Message is sent to the Central Revenue Authority, and the payment is made at the Central Revenue Authority. These are not new. These have been done in countries, and countries have been put right. So that's a third suggestion that I would have. I'll stop there because there are many speakers, and maybe we can get into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, former State Minister of Finance. So before going to the current State Minister of Finance, I would like to invite our speaker from NPP. Professor, floor is yours. Professor Anil Jayantha from NPP.
Thank you very much. Good evening to everyone. Special thanks to Milinda Rajapaksa inviting for me. I think it's a very right, timely discussion, and we need these kind of public discourses, of course. When we take the power of tax, if we discuss only the technical aspects and how best tax is collected, how best that is being used, I think we would just miss something. We would take the eyes off the ball. Taxation is not an independent variable. It's connected. mainly there are many. Among them, I would like to highlight two things. Direct connection is with the economy. Economic development, production, revenue generation. Because there is a misconception about government revenue and taxation. Because it is termed as revenue. But it is not revenue. It is only a shifting of revenue from one place to the other. That is the fundamental truth. So, if the economy is not growing, if we do not take enough actions and forecasting, planning, how best the economy could be developed in a sustainable manner, and trying hard to collect more taxes for the government coffers, then of course we would end up with serious problems. So that is what we are facing as of now, even for next 10 years. So plans are not to expand the economy, still contracting economy. So contraction may be a disguise fortune for sometimes for the rulers, for of course, that is why sometimes this term bankrupt autocracy came into practice. Keep the country bankrupt, then the autocracy can be implemented. So that is the connection. The other connection is the politics. Either we like it or not. So it is pretty much connected with the political program, ideologies, policies, where how the fiscal policies and monetary policies play in this particular thing. So without clearing, like as of now, of course, there are lots of allegations and issues. We know that corruption and so many things. So we need to address these things. So without talking about these contextual things, talking of taxation would be a problem. Now I'll come to the point of taxation. Why do we need tax? Since we have a government. Why do we need a government? If we do not want a government, so that may lead to a different kind of situation, society. But when the number of people big, it's difficult to have a society without having such a government. Government is for the common purpose, not to do private businesses. Some argument is there that is called anarchical syndicalism. Anarchical syndicalism promotes the idea that we don't want to be ruled by others. Then that's a different society. We may not achieve it. But as of now, the practical reality is that we are ruled, government is needed. So therefore, public agents are appointed in order to make all those things feasible and facilitate the things for the common purpose. We need to collect tax. Then who has to pay tax? If it is for the common purpose, every person has to pay tax. There is no arguments for this thing. But we know that differences are there, like every person may not be able to pay, because first of all, they need to have the sizable income to have a reasonable life. That is what we call basic financial freedom is there to have your very good economic life. That is how. So when it comes to these principles, actually there are no arguments, debates about these things. They are required to be adhered and followed. This is how income tax should be, or the taxation on income tax is only one source and tax is needed. So, I mean, whoever who has the basic knowledge, basically Sri Lankan, I mean, the people are highly educated. When we go through these 4 principles, good principles, but when you take the practical situation, all those principles are like blindly violated. It's not a simple tax system, so that's a big problem. Transparency, another big issue. Neutrality, stability, so all those things. So I just urge or request you guys to simply go through the recently published fiscal monitor report by IMF. With numbers, we can identify what is happening, what tax system that we are having. Number one is the revenue collection. How much should be the revenue collection for a government, for the common purpose? For Asia, it is average 25%. Sri Lanka, it is a low amount, as Dumit also just highlighted earlier. But again, another problem, apart from the fact that that is very low, that is now forecasted for next year 12 something, but even less than 10. The other problem is this is fluctuating. The 1 year it is this much, that much. In 1990 it was 23% of GDP. Now it is, we are struggling to just cross the percentage, 10%. So that is a problem. The revenue forecasting problem persists. If you take the emerging countries, according to that particular report, only very few countries has this particular problem. All the other countries are, they have their own problems. For example, we'll take the Thailand. Thailand is a country always faces military coups and lots of issues. But take the example, always government revenue as a percentage of GDP is just about 20. Likewise, there are even India, Pakistan when we take. So then the other people, the stakeholders, players in the economy can plan their own activities as well. When the tax is highly vulnerable, so people really face lots of problems, they find ways and means of escaping these things. Tax evasions, issues also accountable to this issue. Because we live in a society that promotes to maximize your private interest as much as possible. So whoever who has access to information and power, even within so-called tax system, in principle, in theory, in books, policies, whatever things are there, what do? We know, we have evidence they try to evade taxation. They either delay taxation, challenge taxation. Those who do not have that power, those who do not have that information to escape from this thing, so they happen to pay. That is the reason why such a huge, big amount of indirect taxation is there. The poor people can't escape it. Others can escape. So doing the highlight of the fact about this tax rate, I agree with that. But even these highest tax rates, if you take the revenue as a percentage, it is less than 10%. So why is that? Then there should be some leakages. These leakages are in many folds. One is this tax evasion and corrupt practices, corruption. So you have big people, even authority, like officials also involved to some extent in such a sense. Because we are taught to maximize your own utility. Then whenever they have the opportunity, they don't want to work for a common purpose, common prosperity. Then if they do not use that opportunity, they become fools. That is what they do. System really urges them. But we want a different system. That is what, if you want to have such a system, need not to talk about. But we are talking about, next gen talks about the system or a society where we have to live in such a manner. So we need to think of that particular aspect as well. The other area in a good or the sound tax system, this primary balance and the nature of government revenue, expenses and economy, as I told you. If the economy is not expanding, you have to take lots of measures of increase in different taxes, so that is the way. But on the other hand, so in that way we can say that the tax revenue is dependent upon the economy. But when it comes to the government expenditure, unlike in the expenditure of you and me, that expenditure is not independent, not dependent on the revenue. You have a leverage, government has a leverage of spending being independent of the revenue. That is how these big fiscal differences are created. So our fiscal difference is very big. Anyhow, this has to be financed. Then some or other ways that is connected to this particular issue, and it continues, creating lots of problems. And it connects to the primary balance as well. Primary balance is a very good economic indicator. If a country can maintain, not necessarily a positive balance, but a steady primary balance should be there. When we take Sri Lankan situation, primary balance is also fluctuates significantly. So last couple of years, so negative balance was almost 5%, 6%, last year it was 3% something. Now why did IMF wanted to have a positive primary balance? Because they also may have some calculations and understanding that within the prevailing system, governance system, weaknesses and all those things, it is extremely difficult to, stabilize the other things. So that is why they went ahead with revenue-based fiscal consolidation. Thereby, they asked us to manage your expenses based on your revenue. How is it going to be done? So one way is to increase or collect more revenue. But we know that due to the prevailing system, with the existing system, it is hard. Therefore, it is easy for any government to turn toward the general public. Therefore, we go for unnecessary austerity measures. Even IMF knows this. So having these strict austerity measures, it is very difficult for any country to come up with this kind of difficult situation. If you take the list of emerging countries in the recent IMF report, except few, all the countries are having this primary negative balance. That means you have a space to breathe and plan by yourself. But now we don't have that space. We are restricted. 6%, minus 6%, 3% now, plus. So primary balance means the difference between government revenue and expenses without interest. It's a very good indicator to control this revenue-based fiscal consolidation. So this is mere achievement, meeting an indicator to fulfill this with this IMF program. It has no connection with the economic development. That is the problem. Other area I would like to talk a bit, this transparency. I think without debate, this transparency, if we want, we can implement in any country. Especially in Sri Lanka, it is much easier because not only our writing literacy, our financial literacy, there are some arguments. However, it is capable in Sri Lanka, even IT literacy, we have high rates. It is easy for us to go ahead with these fiscal transparency procedures. As of now, IMF has its own code of fiscal transparency, implemented long time back. But we have never ever consulted IMF to implement or have a discussion about and how best this IMF transparency code could be implemented and discussed. It's very simple things, not big things, if they really want it. Number one is the reporting. Reporting, to some extent, I don't say that, transparency is simply just violated. That is there. But the trust and the confidence, reliability of reporting is questionable. How frequent that should be reported, that is one area. Then number two is the budgeting and forecasting. That is the biggest problem in our transparency. Violated. That could be one of the reasons why the authorities may be a little bit reluctant to think of this fiscal transparency code. That service can be obtained even at a very minimal fee or no cost, I suppose. Third area is the risk assessment, analysis and management. It is a fact that any country has to face unexpected things. Even economic variables may not work in the same way as we plan. It may fluctuate. So therefore, there is a risk that the government revenue may fluctuate. This has to be planned and this has to be discussed. And these things should be connected to revenue resource-based management. These are the 4 areas of this fiscal transparency, but we do not talk about all those things. If it comes to that, it is easy for a country to plan for not only the government revenue, which is sizable and adequate enough to fulfill the aspiration of the people, in the meantime, to connect it to a vibrant economy and economic system and stability. The other area, mainly, it is connected to this neutrality and sometimes we can call the fairness. In Sri Lanka, lots of debate, we can question whether our tax system is fair. It is, we agree, I think to a great extent, it's unfair. In many ways. So, in an unfair system, information asymmetry system, weaknesses in governments always favor those who have power and influence to pay less tax, and the burden will be simply passed on to general public. I'll take one example. Now there is a debate about sometimes even next gen as well. How about imposition of mansion tax or like one big tax on wealth? Debate is there. We should not charge, that discourage businesses. And wealth means it's nothing but income that has been generated in the past. So therefore it is unfair to tax on this. It is true. But if we carefully, like critically analyze, why do you have to talk about, I'm not for any kind of, I'm not saying that this is the rate or this should be taxed and all these things. As NPP, our policy is to simply follow and respect all these principles and have a transparent tax system that is fair by everyone. But I would like to highlight the technical point on this. Why countries or rulers or government would tend to go for this or hunt a big wealth and tax? When we submit our tax returns, that is income tax, though the income tax is charged, so you have to declare your assets and liabilities. What does it mean? That has been already accounted. Had you earned anything, your wealth means nothing but your income. So therefore you have to charge income tax, wealth is declared. So wealth is built on the income that you have earned. So if that is the case, need not to tax. But we know that there are lots of 1,001 avenues that people can amass wealth without paying tax. You may challenge, it is not. But in Sri Lanka, it is pretty clear. So that could be one of the reasons why government goes. So likewise, if you just think of different areas, lots of things are there to be discussed. So no matter whether we have a very efficient and vibrant tax system, we need to stop leakages. These are some of the leakages. Deliberate the write-off of arrears, tax arrears. Deliberate privileges. Sometimes we impose some taxes to punish some people and pass some benefits to others as well. It is undemocratic. So other leakages, when the tax system is not respecting the principles, it is pretty obvious that opportunities are created for these, quasi-type contracts, even by tax officers. They become the advisors of tax evasions, and not only mainly when something goes wrong, people accuse politicians. So politicians are seen, so they are one variable, of course, they have their responsibility as well. So other areas are also there. Officials are also there, because the corruption or malpractices or bad things cannot happen only one-sided. When you talk about corruption, government corruption, so how about the other side? Who's the other side? So some private sector or individual. So simply speaking, as of now, we are experiencing a particular tax system that serves the private interest, not the public interest. That is the biggest issue. If we want to serve the public interest, we need to get together and observe these common principles and tax principles to achieve the common objectives for the mankind. So under any situation in the future, I think we have paid a price that is enough, more than enough. In the future, no matter who governs the country, no matter what political ideology would be there. So NPP is for a system, for an economic system, and a tax system, and political system to respect the humanity. Every people should have a life, better life, to have a better education, health, and live in harmony. So with that, due to the time constraints, so I'll stop. Thank you so much. Again, very big thank for next gen. My suggestion is, if possible, we would better go for more and more public discourses. We are lacking public discourses. Instead, we are having some discussions with or to achieve certain private motives or agendas. We make this as a good platform. Thank you very much.
Professor Anil Jayanta is a professor in economics from University of Sri Jayawardhanapura and executive committee member of NPP. So now I will invite man who is actually dealing with these problems in his day-to-day life, State Minister of Finance, Honorable Sinhalaamsinhala.
Good evening, fellow parliamentarians, Honorable Iran Vikramaratne and Honorable Mahanta Dishanayaka, Mr. Duminda Hulangamua, who spoke to us initially, the President of the Chambers, Professor Anil Jayanta, representing the NPP, invitees, ladies and gentlemen. I was listening to all the remarks made by the previous speakers. I think the context of taxation was explained. So I believe I need not explain it again. But however, it's good to see with this economic crisis, most of the ideologies of political parties are now in the same line of determination of recovery. So it's a development. I think I'm grateful to NextGen also. This is the second event I'm taking part of NextGen. I think initially we spoke about the budget when it was introduced last November. But however, as you know, after a very difficult period, if you go back to 15 months, what we experienced and what we experience now, there is a difference. There is a positive difference. To come up to this level, there were a lot of reforms required. But unfortunately, we had to wait for the 17th IMF program to seriously think about these reforms and implement those reforms. There were different governments existing in Sri Lanka over the history. But every government, when it came to the critical points, tried to implement reforms, but thereafter, either to a reason of a change of the government, or when the economy was stabilizing, it was all changed. So now it is a time for us to have a consistent policy. The government has announced the policy. Of course, it will be very clearly within the framework of the IMF program. And when we were discussing the last time with the IMF is also in the view that this should be the last IMF program that Sri Lanka should enter. So if we follow the guidelines of the framework, what we have agreed upon, the staff level agreement and the board approval, and the discussions what we carry on with our creditors, we are also very confident that we may not require another IMF program for stabilization of the economy. With the reforms we have undergone, the economy is showing clear signs of stabilization. But can we be happy with this level? The determination what we saw from Parliament, the broader public of Sri Lanka, 12 months back, do we see that determination now? Most of us are in the view that the economy is fully stabilized, which is not the case. We have a long way to go. If we derail this reform agenda, our situation will be much worse than 2022. So with the main reforms we have undergone, taxation was one of the key reforms. We do understand, and we explained the country that these reforms may be painful in the short run. And eventually it was painful. I don't think we have come out of that pain yet. So we believe that by the end of December 2023, we will see a very much reasonable stabilization. And once we agree upon the debt restructuring process by bilateral creditors, the DDO has been already announced. I think it has been well received by the capital markets. There are different thoughts to it also, but the government was in the view, with the help of our financial advisors and legal advisors and the IMF staff, that this would be the best solution we can give to the situation, to share some burden with the bilateral creditors on debt. I think the centralized revenue agency which Iran was talking about, we are in the process of introducing this centralized revenue agency. While we introduce that, we need a fully digitized economy. So the biggest threat we have right now is, the professor was talking about leakages. Are we really getting the revenue which is due to the government? This is the point that we are addressing now. We have a half-baked digitized system in the IRD, which is limited for them to review, but which is not linked with any of the other institutions. So this is one of the key issues that we are trying to resolve. And we believe by end of next month, we will have a fully operating digitized system. The RAMI system, what they have in operation, will operate fully at the IRD. The tax revenue is not only raising the percentages and the slabs, but eventually that is what we see now. But broadening of the tax base is one of the key aspects of getting the government revenue up. Because as at now, we are also not happy as a government with the amount the base has enhanced during the last maybe 6 or 8 months after the new legislations were introduced. So we are working hard on that. And once this digitized platform is fully in operation, we believe, one, we will have the required taxes collected, and that will enhance transparency of tax administration. So we will strengthen tax administration in Sri Lanka, which was long due, I believe. And the other most important factor we talk in Sri Lanka is about transparency. When we go to international forums, we are identified as a country which is more into corruption vulnerabilities. So this is something we need to address. If you talk to all of you, I would say majority will say that the government should address corruption vulnerabilities. We are, as a government, we are addressing this cause. We have brought in legislations, and we are thankful to the opposition also, because with most of the legislations brought in the recent past, the opposition has supported. Because we all have identified the key areas that needs reforms, apart from the fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation is on numbers. You project, you predict, and you work on these numbers. But addressing corruption is way beyond these numbers. So if we address corruption now, I think Sri Lanka could go into greater heights. We have introduced few legislations. The anti-corruption law is one of the key, I would say. But then people also question us about the implementation process. So as a government, we have introduced the law and we'll also take responsibility in implementing the law. Because you may have a law, but if it is not going to be implemented, expected results may not be seen. And then we know we will address the revenue part of it. The expenditure part of it will have to be addressed. As very rightly said, within a couple of months, expenditure cannot be brought down. We have taken all measures to control government expenditure. But unfortunately, we cannot control the interest payments until the debt restructuring process is finalized and until confidence is built on the economy of Sri Lanka. So we can see the interest rates dropping. It's a huge relief to the Treasury, dropping from about 30% to about 15% is a huge relief to the Treasury. We still don't have access to the capital markets overseas. So once we regain access, the pressure will ease down and we'll be able to manage the economy in a better flow. So I think all in all, if you see, Sri Lanka is getting onto the correct track. But there is a long way to go. We need your support as broader public of Sri Lanka to ensure that public is also aware and being mindful how Sri Lanka could develop, emerge as an economy. Because this economic crisis we underwent was a very painful crisis. I don't think any of us would like to even dream about this crisis again. So from the government's point, the confidence what we could give is, we will ensure that this crisis will not return back to Sri Lanka. We are not talking of the next couple of years. We are not talking of the next decade, but it should never return with all the fiscal consolidations that we are undergoing. And I think no government in the future should look at reversing the reforms what have been done and which are the good practices in the world. These are not, something which was totally new to the economy. These are good practices which have been practiced by emerging markets as well as countries who have developed. So I think we are stepping towards the right direction. That is the reason why the inflation is coming down. The currency is getting strengthened or to a reasonable stabilization. I think once the DDO is endorsed after the legislations required in Parliament, it will have a better strengthening. The cost of living has started to come down. If you look at, we were at a 70% inflation. Lebanon was at 255% inflation. Argentina was over 100% inflation. Suriname, who is undergoing a similar crisis and a recovery and a debt restructuring process, is almost about 70 or 75% inflation. So we are seeing the results. It's good to see that all speakers spoke about the primary surplus we have achieved. But this is something what we have to continue. First quarter, second quarter, achieving the targets will not resolve the problems. We are just ahead of the IMF first review. We are expecting the mission to be here on the 14th, and they will do a review for almost a little above 10 days. And facing this review, and a successful review, will definitely strengthen our economy. It is not only a matter of getting $333 million as a second tranche, but it will be way beyond that. The message we pass on to the investors: once we finalize debt restructuring, credit rating agencies looking at us positively, all will bring in positive results to the economy. So before I conclude, what I want to say is, as a government, we have addressed perennial problems which exist in Sri Lanka. That is financial discipline. We will have a new Public Finance Management Act being introduced by late this year or early 2024. So that will have a better transparency, stringent management of public appropriation of public funds. We have already introduced the Parliamentary Budget Act, where you could also have access to information. Transparency is very much important. So all these measures what we have taken so far will enhance transparency and good governance. So that is something which was lacking in Sri Lanka. So we have the reforms in place, we have the laws in place, we'll have the implementation process in place, and we'll have a better economy thereafter. So the key would be the economy. And I must also say, we have learned from the crisis. We have learned from the crisis. We have to admit that fact. If we don't learn lessons, we will go into a similar or a worse crisis, where we will not have any friendly nation coming forward for Sri Lanka or any development partner coming forward for Sri Lanka. So internationally, Sri Lanka is now recognized as a country which has addressed corruption vulnerabilities, which has enhanced transparency of public funds, which also has laws to tackle corruption. So we didn't have this kind of legislative frameworks 15 months back, I would say. Up until 2022, we didn't have these legislative frameworks. And thereafter, the second step what we are into, that is the same thing what Aaron also expressed, is restructuring of our own SOEs. The policy of the government would be to ensure that we do not go into businesses. However, the government will act as the regulatory authority. We will be the regulatory authority. We want the private sector to drive the economy. So we'll create a conducive environment for the private sector to drive the economy. In terms of attracting FDIs, we will have a new economic commission which will facilitate coordination with all government agencies. You know, you talk to investors, they are not happy with the present system. We do understand that we do not encourage investors to come and invest freely in Sri Lanka. There are too many red tapes. They don't know whom to approach to resolve which problem. So once this economic commission is been established, the law is being drafted now, that will make a very conducive environment for any investor to rethink of Sri Lanka. Tourism is picking up, the remittances are improving. All in all, the economy is showing improvement. So the message what I want to give is, this is our country. We'll have to keep the political ideologies aside for the time being. If we try to bring and mix these two together, we will not get the expected results. So let the political ideologies be aside for the time being. Let us get together. Most of the times now in Parliament it's happening, even though we have heated debates. We have arguments. We have differences in our ideologies, but however, when it comes to the country, it's a different precedent which has been set in Parliament. So things are improving. Most of the times, the finger is pointed at the politician. So I think there is a change in the approach of the politicians also. There is a change in the approach. So that's a healthy sign. Let us work together. As a government, we are open for suggestions. The budget is just around the corner in another couple of months' time for next year. We are now, the budget call has been already sent out to government officials. So you are free and welcome to give suggestions. And if you think the government can do better in decision making and the process on which we have undertaken, you are free to suggest. We are open for your suggestions. So please interact with us, engage with us. Let us get together and make sure that our economy is strengthened and we don't go back to a 2022. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I think we made a good decision placing you as the last speaker for the day. So we will invite all the panelists to join the stage. We will have the panel discussion now. Honorable Minister, Honorable MP Iran and Professor and Mr. Duminder from Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. We have the private sector voice. We have then 3 parties representing. Please come, you can sit wherever you want, whatever the seat you like. And Dhananath, CEO of Advocata, Dhana will moderate the session. And some of our friends who are sitting outside can come in now. We have 5 seats. Radhika, do we have another mic? මේ දරනට දුන්නා හරි. මේකත් ගලවන්න පුළුවන්ද? We have. Shehara, come inside and sit.
Thank you, Melinda. One day, there was a kid playing at the back of the garden. We would call the playground, the home playground. And all of a sudden, the parents realized that the kid was getting a severe breathing problem. All of a sudden, and parents quickly ran towards the kid and then realized that the kid has swallowed or choked a 2 rupee coin, a metallic 2 rupee coin. And then the parents, of course, get very worried. They called the doctor, they called the neighbors, and everyone was quite upset, and they were shaking the little one, and they were tapping behind him and asking him to, split it out, throw it out. Of course, the kid got scared, and now there's a big crowd trying to rescue the kid. And then there was one gentleman walking by the street. And he came very calmly. And he asked, what's the problem? And everyone said, can't you see that kid is struggling to breathe. And he just straight went to the kid and said, "Give me the 2 rupees." And kid coughed twice and spit out the 2 rupee coin. Everyone was surprised. How can you do that? I mean, he was struggling to get it. "Who are you?" then they asked. And he said, "I'm a tax officer from the Inland Revenue Department." But the trick is, no offense to anyone, to collect the tax, it's a delicate balance that we all have to strike. Just because you increase the taxes doesn't mean that the tax revenue will go up. Of course, just because you're bringing down all the taxes doesn't mean the tax revenue is going to go up and the tax base is going to broaden. And that's why I think the Next Gen has put very nicely the 4 principles on the background. It has to be transparent, it has to be simple, anyone can identify, and it has to be stable, and it has to be neutral. And of course, I think the person who is coming also has to be credible to ask for that 2 rupee coin, so then, the operation can be rescued. So with that, I don't expect to ask too many questions. I would also like to pass the baton to the audience, because most of you may have a lot of questions. But till you get ready, I would like to turn towards Honorable Vikramaratne for the first question. Now, these principles has been often discussed, but you have been in the war room. When there's a budget, I wish that Honorable Sinhala was here. But when you are approaching a budget, I can imagine the situation. In one corner, at this case, we know the IMF has given a clear target of reaching a 14% debt to GDP to tax ratio. On the other hand, as you said, you are also aspired to get elected in the next election, and there's an election coming, whoever the politician in the seat. At the same time, there's a public expenditure that needs to be done, and this the gap has to be bridged. So is it realistic to stick to the principles, and how do you approach, and how do you recommend to approach this problem? Because as it's a very difficult balance to strike, because ultimately you are in the hot seat, and what we have often seen is basically you are turning towards specific segments. As you very correctly mentioned in your speech, in 2015 we turned towards the corporates and said, look, if you have earned beyond 2 billion rupees, we are going to get you a tax of 25%. And in 2021, the same thing happened, and there was a mansions tax, and there were multiple these exclusive taxes on selected segments. Tell us, you have been in the war room, how do you approach?
The question of having conflicts is natural and normal. The question about have you been able to hold on to what you think are the fundamental principles? The 75-year history at most times will tell you that you haven't been able to. But there have been periods in which it has been possible, but then others would argue that it came at a financial cost. Now in the 2016-2020, that period, we stuck to it. We had a program, we had an understanding, we had the targets, we went after the revenue, we increased the tax net, all that. And some of the people who didn't like it were people in the business community themselves. You see, but we stuck to it because we were looking at the macroeconomic picture, and we felt that the macroeconomic picture was absolutely critical, so that you put the macroeconomic picture right. I remember when we talked about, looking at oil prices and coming up with a formula. I still remember we went in Parliament and we were talking, and one day I was talking about it and they were laughing on the other side. Oil price formula? What kind of a thing is this? So clearly there are lots of conflicts and issues like this. So one of the things is, as you said, segments come. If you go outside the finance minister's room or Shehan's room every morning, there will be different parties sitting out there. I'm telling you what happens in practice. If Mangala Samaravira chased them, then they came and sat outside my room. I'm telling you what happens in practice. And they come, so one day it's one industry, it's the next day it's another industry, and it goes on and on and on. And then, because you have to win votes and win elections, then you look at them and you want to tell them something they like to hear, or give them some little concession, you know, and this is what really happens in practice. I have come to the conclusion that finance ministers shouldn't be entertaining anyone. Finance minister's primary responsibility is to manage the macro economy. We have been looking too much at segments and coming, and this kind of culture has been built over a long period of time. If he had managed the macroeconomy, if he had managed the balance of payments, if he had managed the exchange rate, interest rates, inflation, you know, the macro picture, I think industry will take care of itself, because they know a lot more than we as politicians actually know. So I sometimes look back from the time I was, you know, in school. Ronnie Demel, long-time finance minister. We don't have to agree with all his policies, but lots of politicians came and sat before him, very powerful ones as well. He listened to them, he smiled with them, he nodded his head, and he just did what had to be done, particularly on the macro economy. We slipped into a situation where presidents and prime ministers also began to occupy the finance portfolio. That's a real mess, because they are the ones who really have to manage the political side. And then when you combine it with finance, it gets into a big mess. So if you look at the recent crisis, it's a macro economy that really we messed up with. And then when the macroeconomy is mixed up, everybody gets into a mess, not just one industry, you see. And if you you go the other route and you favor one, sometimes you put the others at a disadvantage. So given the issues of neutrality, you know, and lots of those principles actually get cut. So it's not easy, it's tough, and I'm sure they're going through that now, because the call has gone. The call goes out in July. And then they finalize, probably begin to finalize by October, budget speech in November, and on December, middle of December, we vote on it.
Thank you, Honorable Vikramatne. I also, if you have questions, please indicate so we can get those questions till you get prepared. I would turn to Mr. Ulangamua. Now, you spoke about the neutrality factor, and you mentioned that it is pretty much an expenditure problem rather than a revenue problem. At the same time, one of the main concepts under neutrality is the government cannot select winners or losers through the tax policy. You can't, like for a specific segment, you can't impose a tax. At the same time, you can't give tax holidays for selected sectors, because if everyone says, okay, Dhananath is the favorite, so you don't pay taxes, okay, I would be happy to do that, but 3 of you have to bear the tax that I should have been paid on behalf of me. So there has also been a discussion about massive tax holidays, and especially through that strategic act where the minister has the power to select certain sectors and single-handedly give tax holidays, which is also another discussion on what has happened. What are your thoughts on that? You're also, while being a tax professional, you are now also the chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. What's your stance on this?
So, Dhananath, this question of whether tax holidays, incentives, and discriminating sectors in the economy and granting special privileges is right or wrong is a debatable issue. But in terms of the principle of neutrality, yes, everyone should pay tax is the position. But I think taxation has been used as a tool not only to collect revenue, it also, over the years, has also become a tool to incentivize economy. So, if you look at from 1977 is a period where the economy opened out and the GCC, or the Great Economic Commission, established. And they gave a plethora of exemptions from Inland Revenue Act and the customs duties and exchange control in order to boost the economy and invite new foreign capital to the country. And that was a time that other countries didn't have similar incentives. And Sri Lanka was one country that had similar had very attractive incentives. So it really paid off. The free trade zone came as a result of that. Karnataka to Biyagama, large amount of investors came to Sri Lanka and started businesses, and we started our export industry. Then, of course, President Premadasa took it to a different level where he made the entire country a GCC. So there are pluses and minuses there. But on the plus side, the today's garment industry, that is become the highest foreign exchange of Sri Lanka, is the result of that policy. But then one may argue and say he should have extended to every single enterprise. We should have made it to certain sectors like exports, because Sri Lanka has a need to develop its export base, need to develop its export income, and therefore we need to give priority to exports. So it's a debatable issue whether the economy would have got these investments, the economy would have grown at the same rate if not for the tax holidays. Is a debatable issue. But if you look at, to answer your question on strategic development projects, it's a similar thing. I think it's again another act which gives incentives. So if you look at the broader question of giving targeted incentives, I think it has had its results, it has brought investments, it has contributed to the economy. So the question is the contribution that the particular enterprise or the industry or the company is making to the economy far outweighs the cost of taxation. So the loss tax, if it creates employment, if it creates investment, if it creates foreign currency income, if it contributes in a larger proportion to the economy that outweighs the cost of tax, then I think it's worthwhile. Now, one might turn out and say the SDP Act gives discretion. The discretion part we leave out separately, but if it act itself, in my view, when the war was ended, they had to attract anchor investments to the country. So Shangri-La was one of the bigger investments that came under the FDP Act. And I think with that followed many investments thereafter. Well, I might wonder why it was 25 years, 15 years, that's a question. But I think it has its pluses also. We're able to attract many more SDP projects like that. Giving discretion to the minister is not the correct thing. You can have the guidelines, you can have the gazette notifications, prescribe and make it transparent. But I think in certain times of the year or certain times of the era, we need to decide whether we should give tax holidays or not. Today, we can't. Why? Because today our priority is revenue collection and stabilizing the economy and getting the investment and getting the expenditure deficit rectified. So in that situation, we can't give incentives. We can't give exemptions. That's why everything was removed and tax was made equal 30% of everyone. But that is because we are stabilizing the economy. But if you want to grow the economy, as he said, then we may have to give incentives. I don't know. People might come because Vietnam is giving, India is giving, Malaysia is giving. There are so many other countries to go to. Where Sri Lanka is not equal in everything else. Our social indexes are low, our political stability is low, our security is low. So when we are not scoring well on those aspects, we had some carrot that we had offered to the foreign investors coming here. And taxation is the only carrot that has been offered. So if our social indexes are fantastic, super, we are above Singapore, yes, we can. I can tell you an example. When the ICC wanted to relocate out of Dubai in 2009 or 10, I remember, they put the bid and they were going to Singapore. And at that time, the cricket board wanted to make submit a bid for ICC to come to Sri Lanka. And taxation was one of the issues. And at that time, Secretary of Finance, I sat with him and the cricket board and he gave exemption from every single act. But they never came. Why? Because Sri Lanka was for indexes. So if we are good indexes, then it's okay. So that's the equation I want to bring to you.
Thank you, Mr. Langama. Now, before I go for quick questions, I will quickly go to Professor Anil Jayanta as well. Professor Jayanta, now, if let's assume that there's an election coming in and people are considering NPP and different political parties for voting. Now, you won't, if we assume hypothetically for this moment that if NPP gets to power, you won't get a blank sheet. Of course, you inherit the system with corruption and with the current IMF program, with so many other issues. So in that context, how would you expect to address this tax problem? You spoke about the money which has been earned in unethical terms, so to tax it on that front, but till we get to some resolvement, the ship is moving because the debt restructuring process has gone forward. There's IMF agreement which has been inked. as a government. So how do you try to approach this problem? Because just because getting to power doesn't mean that you completely keep the previous luggage outside. You are just getting through the same system. How do you try to approach this problem, Professor Janathan?
Thank you, Jananath. Yes, as you just rightly pointed out, it is a fact, and it's true that, like, so if we take the power with the current context, we need to address first what it is. It's not advisable, and it's not the right thing to do drastical changes, like in line with principles or in any other strategies. So first we need to just go through the present situation and see how it's going on. And because if you try to do like abrupt changes, that might rather derail the situation, of course. However, within which there are certain areas we can easily track. So one is some leakages which happens due to inefficiencies, which happens due to the collusion with some officials and others, and unnecessary tax evasion and tax the rights off. Those things can be quickly arrested with the help of technology and with the right and appropriate political guidelines. Like, for example, one of the biggest issue, as I just highlighted, it's connected to the conflict of interest. So we have developed kind of policies. We abide by to just adhere all those things. We are not going to do any business with the government. Like, then there will not be any conflict of interest, and that is going to be implemented for sure. If the things come from top, initially we believe that we can curtail lots of leakages which are happening as of now. That is the main area. And on top of that, the tool that we are using is the technology, but it takes time, of course. The other thing is, there are certain areas, as of now, the economy has expanded to certain informal sectors. We have a very big doubt whether they are taxed. So because when we take some business models, the revenue model happens abroad, only the expenditure models is here. We need to rethink of these kind of things, how best we can bring it, because they remit only a limited amount of money. Even some foreign direct investments as well, like, when a country is corrupt, of course, these vulture investors, opportunistic investors also know that how best they play. So they use this as the place to transfer the wealth. For example, even so-called BOI companies, most of like the products are export-oriented. Then you expect export revenue. But throughout the history, so 20, 25 years, in 30 years' time, this under-invoicing and over-invoicing happen. Authorities in Inland Revenue know very well this. So we can't track it. So mainly politicians do not want this because they are also benefited in a way. Because here, even though we see that politicians are taking decisions, in the past, maybe 30, 50 years, especially before 1980s, situation would have been a bit different because they played a role. Now, actually, they are playing a role for someone they are not seen in the picture. They are behind the screen. They are not big, giant economists even. Actually, now, in Sri Lanka, there is a big financial sector has been created, financial sphere. They are the people they control. It doesn't mean that, very few. That is the reason why even the recent debt restructuring, local debt restructuring, at the very beginning, they carried out a very big lobbying campaign saying that if this happens, of course, it shouldn't have been done in my view because there are lots of avenues and the people who are responsible for this thing should have been punished. Instead of that, it was simply transferred to the local. But within Sri Lankan scenario, they knew very well that they are going to touch banks, right? So they started the campaign, right? Lobbying campaign saying that don't touch bank. We are not supposed to pay that much money. Already we have paid lots of taxes. So therefore, innocent people, like finally, government happened to channel it through to the EPF. So what I'm saying you simply, that is only one example to tell you, in a corrupt system, things happen in an undemocratic manner. So therefore, it has to be corrected from the top, not at the ordinary level. So my answer is that the initial step, we are not going to do big changes, but initially minor management things, efficiency, these kind of, through these kind of things, we can increase the tax revenue. But in the long run, medium term and longer run, actually our tax revenue will be increased by expanding the economy, creating more space. Just 1 minute. Take up family. So in a family, assume that there are 4 or 5, they earn. If we take some money for the common purposes, like electricity, water, and other things, so then it is understood that those who earn more should contribute. But if family income does not expand, and you try to get more, what happens? Then there would be a bargaining process. People would come and say, no, I have that lease, this lease, so I am not going to pay. So finally what happens, who would be easily subdued to the commands of the family will pay this. The same thing happens in the economy. The short run address is something else, but the long run is the sustainable and something that is good for a country.
Thank you, Professor Jayantha. I would like to open questions for the floor, but before that, you can watch this live stream through AsiaMirror. Rasika is reminding me multiple times. So make sure that even if you miss some of these conversations, you can go back and watch the live stream again from the AsianMirror. I don't think we have a microphone. I think we can go, first Charana and then I think Dilan at the back. So then please indicate that I will pass the floor. We'll get 2 questions in the same row, and then I think we can get the answers from the panelists. Thank you. 1 second. I will get another question and then we'll go for answers. Thank you. Just in case if you don't hear, I will come back to you after getting answers for these 2 questions. In case if you didn't hear, the first question is about the tax holidays which was provided for Shangri-La, and the second question is about the government expenditure, which we recently heard about, some of the wastage expenditure, some of the corruption and the waste that took place in some of the projects, while the IT sector is suffering. What's the governance structure that was being discussed? Sorry, I beg your pardon. It was on the Port City, the tax holiday. Over to you, Ms. Ulangamua.
Yeah. So I can't remember offhand the gazette regulation is 40 years or 25 years. I think the Port City gazette regulations that are published recently. Yeah. So I can't remember offhand, but I don't think usually the Port City regulation will give the power to the Commission to decide based on published guidelines what the tax holiday should be based on the investment they bring in. But I don't agree it should be 40 years. Because that again, the whole idea of the Port City is it has to filter down to the people. Once you give a tax holiday and invite people, the benefit must come to the people in terms of goods and services supplied to the Port City. So if there is no filtering taking place to downstream to Sri Lanka, there is no point. So whether it should be 25 or 40 is a debate, I don't know, but I can't remember it's 40, I thought it was 25 years, was what they gave Port City based on the regulations, and I don't think it should be evolving tax holiday. It should sunset at some point, so 40 I do agree.
Next question is to Honorable Vikramatne.
Yeah, I'd like to just comment on this tax holiday thing. We've had the BOI, then we have had the strategic law, and now we are going into the port city. I'm very skeptical of tax holidays. I think it's unbelievable that we have had tax holidays without a sunset clause. Sri Lanka, if I go back and look for 40 years, extremely poor in terms of attracting investment when we compare it with our peer group. I was on the BOI myself as a banker, maybe 20 years ago, right? So I'm very, very skeptical, right? This argument, people make it, both ways, but very skeptical and very concerned that we are going with the port city in the same direction. And then in port city is going to be a little more complicated because institutions and individuals as well, some of those exemptions are going to be made. And then those who are outside it. And then they are saying you can't really transfer from outside into inside, and they will have. Business, there's always ways of doing it. All you do is register a new company, get a foreign partner, shift the business. I mean, these are all crap talk. When you have these things, this is how it will actually happen. Because after all, businesses want to make money. And if you open the door, it will be there. So I'm really, really concerned about it, right? I would even say, these people who have been given absolutely long, 40 years, I don't know who is thinking like this even, right? 40 years. I would renegotiate the tax holidays. If I can renegotiate debt, bankrupt country, why can't I renegotiate tax holidays? Investments are not based only on tax holidays. And Duminda suggested that because everything else is going wrong, maybe it's like a carrot. That may be some truth in that. But I don't think that's a fundamental issue. There are more fundamental issues, right? On the doing business index, we are 99. On the enforcement of contracts, we are 164, right? And really, business people are more concerned about environment. They're concerned about law, right? They're concerned about confidence. In the parliament that I was in, 7, 8 years ago, we brought a law, and overnight, we just took some businessmen's assets. People never forget those things. Those are the real issues. People don't have confidence, and they don't have trust, and they don't think it's going to actually work. I think we have to sort those things out. I think there is too much emphasis on the tax and not on really creating the environment. I'm not completely sure if I understood your question. So is it related to IT or is state-owned enterprises? Yeah, state-owned enterprises.
Yeah. So I can only make a general comment there because I don't know the specifics of
what you referred to and so forth. I think that there's no way that we could have sustainable losses in state-owned enterprises which taxpayers are paying for. Look at it another way. What are we really doing? We are maintaining a public service without actually calling it as social transfers. That's what we are actually doing. But the productivity is not there, goods and services are not there, exports are not there, losses are mounting, and it's going on and on and on. So, needs to be commercially run. State ownership itself should be only if there's a strategic reason. Otherwise, even state ownership should be minimized or given to the private sector. Management, definitely private sector. That is why my reference to even things like Temasek and Kazana was, we can learn from the other countries. The time has come. I was very happy to hear Minister Shehan say that the government has decided no more getting into business, but they will focus on regulation. There may be strategic reasons why that there may be some exceptions, energy security, food security, like that. There may be some strategic areas which you need to actually look at it. And this idea that has been sold for too long by some, interested parties that, you're selling state assets and all. These are state liabilities that you are talking about. And they have been positioned like they're state assets. Taxpayers are continuing to pay, right? And some of them are running into billions and billions of accumulated losses. You can't even privatize them because nobody is going to buy them. nobody is going to buy them. We had to be really, really sensible about it, you see. I had one of those institutions under me for a short while. I was called in by the president, and I was about to be given that, and I told him I don't want it. He was taken aback that I'm saying I don't want it. He asked me why. I said I can't turn it around. So why would I want to take it? I came from the private sector. If I'm taking on a business, I will look at if it's something that I can turn around and add some value. So I told him that, and he was like shocked, right? And then he said, whether you like it or not, I'm going to put it under you. See? And he actually gave it. And I presented a report getting all the specialists about that particular institution and said, what can be done? The present government is still struggling with it. The losses are 400 billion. 400 billion. What do we spend on education and health in this country? So, I mean, I'm completely with that. I don't know what the particular incidences, but as a philosophy, we have to deal with it.
Thank you. Before coming to you for the neutrality principle, I would also like to turn to Dr. Anil Jayantha. You mentioned about, I'm not sure whether I understood it right or I heard it right, that the policy of NPP is not getting into government business. Did I heard it right? Did I hear it right? And also I wanted to ask, the IMF agreement, it mentions about a wealth transfer tax and an inheritance tax. What is there a policy by the NPP, or has this been discussed in these sorts of taxes? Because you also mentioned if someone has earned, as we discussed, on corrupt means some wealth beyond going their income, how are you going to recover? I mean, are you planning to use tax as a policy to recover that money, or is it the judiciary system which is going to take place? I just wanted to highlight on the fact, because there are some media representatives, otherwise tomorrow it would be on the headlines that the NPP said that the NPP is not going to engage with businesses. I just want to re-clarify for your own, I would say, the media safety, and at the same time also on the wealth tax and the wealth transfer tax and the inheritance tax.
So business, the definition again, business is to earn profits. So we do not engage in this business to earn profits. Again, the business I referred, the conflict of interest of politicians. So whoever who is going to take any portfolio and responsibility is not supposed to have any conflict of interest in carrying out any kind of business operation. So that's it. However, as an entity, the government has a responsibility. So where we don't think that the government could engage in economic activities and create value. Rather, we propose and take measures to create an environment that is really conducive for creating value and ease of doing businesses. Then we open it up. So we really prefer to have the competition. However, there are certain areas, because as we like, even the Milton Friedman highlighted, competition doesn't happen over last 400 years. What's happening is, in the name of competition, oligarchies and monopolies are being created. So in some areas, so it is so dangerous, especially when it comes to, as Ran highlighted, the food security, agriculture. So then government has a role to intervene and deliver and assure the public interest. In that regard, we have different models actually. Some models are monitoring models. Some interventions are taking real actions. For example, as of now, throughout the world, it is a fact that energy and financial sectors are very critical. So energy, of course, everybody can understand that that is very critical. So therefore, no argument is strategically, for strategical reasons, we engage in energy sector by holding a stake and actively engaging in that market to make sure that energy will not really destabilize the economic activities. But on the other hand, that is not that much been discussed, the financial sector. Because as of now, without knowing something is happening, it is none other than the economic value created in the economic sphere, that is the production of goods and services, is gradually being shifted towards financial market. In the financial markets, so there are two ways, two things. One is to help and finance the economic activities. Of course, we promote and we encourage, and we need to have so many other financial institutions, even private, public, even government. So for example, including new development bank. We have thought of establishing a new development bank, maybe one or two, so we'll discuss. Because our idea is to bring about that, not to implement something in our mind. But the other area is finance is being used through lots of fictitious assets, creating in a market. By changing here and there, quickly they earn billions of rupees. That is nothing but the value created in other sectors in shifted through information asymmetry. That is bad. That is why we say that NPP is taking the control of financial sector. So whereby we need public sector banks. So as of now, lobbying is in launch to even privatize Bank of Ceylon, People's Bank, NSBN, saying that no, private sector, it has to be privatized and all this. So it's really dangerous. We never know how they really derail all those things. Just imagine the situation last, the troublesome period. All the business sectors, no matter whether big or small, big companies, small and medium scales, they were really facing hard time. But big bankers, so they multiplied profits. So that is the reason. So we got to be very careful of those things. Okay, 1 minute. The idea is this, so it's understood what I just highlighted. So we are not we have not intended to impose such a tax, but basically we want to carry out due process. Of course, if there is anything people have amassed through corrupt manner or any other way, they can't account for it. Of course, we try to recoup it through legal processes. Maybe with the existing, this is what we have clearly highlighted, through the existing legal process, or if we want, we can bring or enact new things to this temporarily, because that is the initial situation. But later on, actually we strongly believe that we would be able to implement a very good, vibrant and transparent tax system. In a transparent tax system, nothing to worry, because the technology would automatically solve the things. People also do not have any problem, because as long as people see the transparency, they know that how their tax money is working. For example, I would like to highlight one thing. In the recent fiscal monitor report, Sri Lanka has not provided any detail about the structural aspect of the tax. Mainly they have asked for the future changes in the percentage of money spent on education, health and other areas to have a very good society. So that information is not there. Whereas other countries are prospering, so they show the gradual the progresses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jayanta. I think I'm sorry to keep you waiting, sir. Please, yes, go ahead with the question very briefly. Okay, thank you very much. So the question is very direct. How a president can solve a question regarded with the corruption and overcome an economic crisis. Are there any questions so we can take that up? Yes, sir, please. We'll take that and we'll come back to you because, yes.
I think whether a place is making profits or not making profits is not relevant. I think that we just need to look at each institution, and we should look at who can create the most amount of value. We are the government. Once you create the value, we will tax it, because we need the revenue to do and create social justice.
Thank you. Mr. Hulankamu has to leave, so I will, before I come to you for the gentleman's question, I will quickly shoot a question. You mentioned about the cess. I finally found the definition. It's the Commodity Export Subsidy Scheme. And it's interesting, cess is imposed on imports, but the Commodity Export Subsidy Scheme. I don't know how an export tax became on imports, but that's for another day. But I would like to highlight on the tax competitiveness. Now, you basically in your remarks, you mentioned actually we have stretched to the maximum level, that 36% income tax and about 30% corporate tax. If you look at the UK, earlier their corporate tax was 19%. I think from 2022 April, I think they have revised it for about 25%. So while as an economy we have to be competitive even in taxes. So while someone offers 25 taxes, we can't say we are offering 35 taxes. That doesn't make sense, because ultimately it's a competitive environment even in taxes. So how do you recommend as a tax professional to balance this? I think this also comes to the tax holidays conversation, but of course you had a stance on not to have there has to be a sunset clauses. But how do you maintain the tax competitiveness, especially when you are trying for investment, when you are trying to attract investors, things like that?
Yeah. So at the moment, I don't think we have the liberty and the flexibility to have a low tax regime. Because of the economic crisis we face, the inability to service our debts, inability to make our expenditure, we had to increase our taxes to this rate. So I don't think we were very competitive in terms of our income tax rates, personal income tax rates, as well as the corporate rates up until the increase took place. If you compare the region, we were below India, we were almost equal to Singapore and Hong Kong. So we were not at all competitive now. But then, to take a point from what Iran said, if we were competitive in terms of taxation in the last 3-4 years or 10 years probably, I don't think that has moved the needle in terms of investment. So as I said, taxation alone is not a tool that a foreign investor will look at to see whether to invest in Sri Lanka or not. Of course, it will be one of them. So although we had 18% tax rate, we had 14%, for example, we have been having 14% tax rates for exports for the last 25 years. Hotels, since I left school, it has been at 14% concession rate. So exports, if it was at 14%, taxation was a real booster for exports, then we should have been to $50 billion export, not $10 billion, right? So I don't think taxation being competitive alone is adequate to increase economic activity, to increase investment to sector, domestic investment as well as foreign investment. But of course, given people will take it. So in my view, it is only one item in the agenda. But there are so many other factors that an investor will look at prior to investing in Sri Lanka, domestic and otherwise.
Thank you. I will quickly give you the opportunity to respond to that previous question.
Okay. I'll just give a short answer. In fact, I do not know how the president is going to solve it. By looking at the present statistics and the way the government votes, it looks like government is not going to solve the problem of people. Instead, they are trying to solve their own problem, that is none other than just the protecting their power centers and clinching and getting the power back. So that is I do not know how, when, and whether they would be able to do that. So that is that we are doing. You can understand these things from some statistics in this IMF report and deal. Of course, just going for dealing with IMF is not a bad thing. You have to do this thing at this particular juncture. So no any other option. We need to have a third party ratification to overcome this situation. But provided that the numbers that the government has given and agreed are contradictory and they are struggling. Take the very simple example of interest rates and inflation, exchange rates. So government doesn't have such a clear policy of maintaining it. On the one hand, the very beginning they said that they tried to arrest the interest by releasing so much money by borrowing at a very high rate, whereas they're keeping the policy rate at 14, 15. Then again, now in the IMF deal, so they want to bring the inflation to a single digit, right? In a way that is good idea, like we need to have a kind of inflation in a thriving economy, otherwise lots of problem would be created. But in doing so, on the other hand, now they are cutting the statutory reserve requirement from 4 to 2 is contradictory. And at the same time, they're releasing more money. So that, in a way, that means by lowering the interest rate, I mean, I'm not saying that that is a bad idea, but I'm saying it is a contradiction. So lowering the interest rate, it is good, but the lowering the interest should come from real economic growth to great extent, not by policy manipulation. Here, mainly through policy manipulation. So it is temporary. It would be counterproductive. That is the problem. Then once of course, in a very vibrant and democratic economy, export or the foreign exchange rate should be set free. But here, with all these constraints, on the one hand, government has to comply with the IMF requirement and release those restrictions. But on the other hand, government want to keep the exchange rate down, but that is not possible. So whereas all those actions in the field of finance, interest rates, tax proposals, in the restructuring state-owned enterprises, all those things very clearly show that they are trying to show IMF that they meet those indicators, intermediary indicators by September. So objective is to obtain this particular tranche. Then the political propaganda might say, this is the only way to come out from impasse. Of course, there is a way, provided that there is a particular economic, the plan to revive the economy and expand the economy and get the people engaged in the economy with a kind of confidence. That's not there. It's unlikely there.
Thank you, Professor Jayanta. So my last question is for, you have a question. Yes, please go ahead.
Keep the remarks brief because
otherwise it might lead to misunderstanding. No, what I just mentioned that it is not the only solution, but I just highlighted the fact that as of now, country has unilaterally declared that we are bankrupt. Then if we can find out any other third party to clear this off, it's okay. So just dealing with IMF to clear this bankruptcy only, and not to accept these excessive austerity measures. So that is what we are vehemently against. As of now, just disregarding all the other aspects, government is implementing these austerity measures, whereby bringing this primary, pushing the primary balance to 2.3%. So it's impossible. So in order to do this thing, you have to impose so much tax. So no country in this world has achieved their development targets by implementing unnecessary austerity measures, even if we come to power. So with IMF, we deal with them. It doesn't mean that we follow their rules. Actually, there are lots of avenues for renegotiation. That is why we have stated we will do a particular special investigation that is called debt audit about all these foreign borrowings. With those facts, actually we can renegotiate with the bilateral and especially where we have borrowed from the ISB, open market. I think it's clear, otherwise that may be a misunderstanding that I said that we are going ahead with IMF present plan. No, we are ready to work with IMF. In addition to that, actually, as I highlighted, we will invite IMF to implement this fiscal transparency plan. So no cost at all, that's good.
Thank you. My final question to Honorable Vikramaratne. In your remarks, you mentioned basically about the single revenue collection authority. Could you kindly elaborate on that a bit? I mean, briefly. At the same time, I think what came out from you and Mr. Hulangamu was it's pretty much about a expenditure problem from the government side, because we are not spending it right and we are spending extravagantly. At the same time, there are a lot of loss-making enterprises. But however, I got some statistics pulled out. So if you look at Sri Lanka, our expenditure as a percentage of GDP from 2016 to 2019, which was ranging about 14% to about 12% as the GDP. But if I get the competing markets, Malaysia, Philippines, India, Thailand, Vietnam, their expenditure as a percentage of GDP is far higher. They are in the range of 19% Malaysia, 20% Philippines, 19% India, Thailand 21%, Vietnam, the East Asian giant, is at 25%. This is again in 2019. So I just wanted to see, is there, because it shows that actually our government is not spending compared to the region, but of course they may have a better tax collection system for them to spend on the other side. But how do you see this? Are we spending on wrong things? And also on the single tax collection office or the mechanism that you explained about as the concluding question?
Yeah, so wastage and corruption, anyway, that needs to be taken out. But my main point there is that we are spending more than 10% basically on defense, just on provincial councils, and all the other public services. It's probably nearly 23, 24% or whatever. So what we are really arguing here is that some of those areas need to be rationalized, and that, because I said that, you cut there, not that expenditure is going to get cut, but you have to refocus that expenditure on education and health. So you have to actually shift it. I think that's the main point that I was making, and I'm saying there should be a serious debate about that, because human resources definitely has to be one of our biggest comparative advantages. But my point is not only on expenditure. My point on income is leakage is one. There are other ways to collect expenditure revenues, not just through tax rates. That is why I was arguing that you need even to look at public assets and then try to figure out how to do it.
And also single revenue collection.
Single revenue collection authority, one is to take away the interaction between the consumer or the public and the officials. That's one reason. The other is you'll have to go in there, you'll have to digitize quite a bit. You'll have to have the identity system work, like the Aadhaar system in India. And unfortunately, the minister is not here. They went somewhere there and they had even actually almost finalized it. And I heard recently that they have pulled back and now they're going to start it all over again. I don't know what the reasons are. So again, another delay. This kind of reform will be resisted. Right? But I think that if you really look through it, and I was glad to hear the minister say that they were also thinking like that, I think it's going to make a huge difference in the future.
Thank you, Honorable Wickramaratne. Thank you, Professor Anil Jayanta. I would, though he left early. So that wraps up the panel discussion, but I don't want to be the person who's standing between this conversation and the mouth-watering dinner on the other side. So I invite Rasika Jayakodi for vote of thanks and for the final remarks. Over to you, Rasika.
Thank you, Dhananath. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I won't take a long time. Basically, I just wanted to make some concluding remarks about what we tried to achieve here. As Next Gen SL, as people representing different political organizations, political parties, we all want to have a tax system based on some solid founding principles. That's why we have highlighted founding principles such as simplicity, transparency, neutrality, stability, and as Mr. Iran Wickramaratne mentioned, equity. We must have strong founding principles so that we can have a fair taxation that benefits all. So that was the purpose of this discussion, and we heard a lot of positive remarks from all these representatives. I mean, in a context where we hear a lot of speculations about, ad hoc super gain taxes and so on, it was a very welcoming sign that everyone was talking about some solid founding principles. So that's very reassuring. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Honorable State Minister of Finance, Sinhalaamsinhala, former State Minister of Finance, MP Iran Wickramaratne, Professor Anil Jayanta from the NPP,
Mr. Duvinda Hulangamua from the Chamber of Commerce, and Dhananath for moderating the session. It was a great session, a lot of insights were shared, and thank you for being a vibrant audience and engaging with us. That's a very important thing. And we planned the event for 80 people. I think we have over 100, so you might have some supply chain issues during dinner, but the bar is just outside, so you can drown all those issues in alcohol. So, okay, and thank you very much. Have a pleasant evening.
Mirror.lk